Have you felt yourself slowly unraveling from the life you once knew, as if the things that used to comfort you now feel strangely hollow, and the roles you played no longer fit your skin? There is confusion, yes, and grief. But beneath it all, there is also a quiet voice that refuses to die, a whisper from the depths that urges you forward, without explanation. Carl Jung would not have seen this as a disorder. He would have called it the sacred beginning. The signs may not look glorious from the outside. They may resemble fatigue, emotional withdrawal, even disillusionment. But make no mistake, this is not collapse. It is emergence. You are not falling apart. You are shedding. For Jung, the soul does not rise through comfort. It ascends through the symbolic death of everything inauthentic. When the world around you starts to lose its meaning, it is often because something truer within you is demanding to be born. You are entering the archetypal terrain of transformation, the liminal space between what was and what will be. And while the ego may panic in the face of such uncertainty, the soul recognizes the invitation. If you've been asking, what is happening to me? Why can't I go back to who I was? Know this: you are not being punished. You are being pulled inward, closer to the self. Jung spent his life mapping this hidden journey, and if you are encountering these subtle but powerful signs, it means you are already on it. The signs of soul rising are often misunderstood by society because they don't always look like progress, but they are the truest indicators that your inner world is awakening. And once the soul begins to rise, there is no going back. Only forward, only deeper, only home. The pain that emerges at the beginning of awakening is not a flaw in your journey. It is the first sign that something ancient within you has begun to stir. When Carl Jung spoke of the soul's rise, he did not describe a peaceful ascent into bliss, but a tremor in the foundations of who you thought you were. The moment when what once made you feel safe begins to suffocate you. The shadow, as Jung named it, does not arrive in softness. It enters as emotional confusion, a heaviness in the chest, an inner dissonance that makes the world feel off-key. You are not malfunctioning. You are awakening. This unease is not a breakdown, but a symbolic rupture. The moment your unconscious begins to speak through the cracks of your carefully constructed self. And what it speaks of is truth, long buried and aching to be known. Jung warned us not to fear the shadow, for the shadow is not evil. It is the unacknowledged, the unloved, the unseen. It is your sadness, your anger, your shame, your wildness, your creativity, all the parts you had to repress to fit into the world. And the danger, Jung said, does not lie in these instincts themselves, but in the refusal to face them. The moment your emotions start to swell without explanation, when your thoughts feel torn between staying and breaking free, that is the moment the unconscious begins demanding its rightful place. This is often ignited by external events, a heartbreak, a failure, a betrayal. But they are only catalysts. What's rising is not just pain. It is the hidden self asking for resurrection. You may feel the life you once built begin to crumble. Conversations that once delighted me now feel empty. The roles you performed so well begin to feel like costumes. This is not regression, it is deconstruction. The persona, the social mask you've worn to survive, starts to collapse, and it hurts. Because beneath the persona lies the authentic self, long exiled, now returning. Jung believed that this collapse is the beginning of individuation, the sacred process of becoming whole. And that path begins not in light, but in darkness, not in peace, but in paradox. When you feel torn between who you were and who you are becoming, that conflict is not a failure, it is the soul stretching toward truth. Jung taught that all transformation is born from tension between opposites. The old self clings to comfort, the emerging self demands truth. And their struggle is the crucible of rebirth. If you feel like you are falling apart, know this: It is only the false parts of you that are dying. What is being born is not a new version of the mask. It is the return of the self. Let the pain guide you inward. Let it burn what is no longer real. This is not the end. It is the crossing, when no one around you seems to recognize who you are becoming, and even your closest companions begin to drift like shadows in a fading dream. You have not lost your way. You have entered what Carl Jung would call the sacred silence of individuation. This silence is not social emptiness, it is symbolic exile. It marks the moment when your soul begins to rise beyond the frequencies of the familiar, and the roles you once played no longer fit the evolving script of your becoming. People say, "You've changed," and indeed you have, but what they do not see is that this change was not a rebellion against them. It was a return to yourself. Jung taught that the first sign of true individuation is not praise, but separation. You begin to feel like an outsider, even in rooms you once called home. Conversations become strained, laughter feels hollow, and the mask you wore to belong starts to slip off without your consent. But this discomfort is not failure, it is transformation. The soul cannot rise while clinging to collective norms, and so it pulls you inward, away from the crowd, into solitude, not to punish you, but to prepare you. This stage of inner withdrawal, Jung believed, is where the unconscious begins to speak more loudly than the world around you. You may feel the weight of disconnection, but what you are really experiencing is resonance breaking. You are no longer in alignment with the energy you once shared. This is the sacred filter of becoming. It is not arrogance, it is alignment. As you pull back from noise, from small talk, from environments that demand your inauthenticity, you begin to hear something more profound. Your own inner voice. You are not lonely. You are being recalibrated. The soul does not speak through applause. It whispers through symbols, silence, and dreams. Jung understood that the journey inward is not easy. It is marked by guilt, confusion, even grief. You may mourn friendships that cannot grow with you. You may feel the sting of being misunderstood. But what is truly dying is the illusion that you ever needed to be understood by everyone. And in that death, there is profound freedom. This sacred isolation is the womb of your rebirth. It is where the old persona dissolves and the true self begins to emerge, slowly, quietly, with strength. The opinions of others begin to lose their grip on your nervous system. Your worth is no longer dependent on your role in someone else's story. You find refuge not in external validation, but in inner knowing. When you no longer need others to see you clearly, you are finally free to see yourself clearly. Jung would say, this is where the self awakens, the source of your authenticity, sovereignty, and silent power. So if you are misunderstood, if you are being called inward, do not resist. You are not retreating. You are re-entering the truth. There comes a sacred threshold on the journey inward, where the soul can no longer bear the weight of performance. The mask you once wore with such ease begins to crack beneath the strain of your own truth. You cannot force a smile when grief is rising. You cannot pretend to care when your spirit feels hollow. You cannot nod in agreement when your very cells resist the lie. This is not weakness. This is emergence. Carl Jung spoke of this as the disintegration of the persona, the carefully constructed identity you built to survive in a world that demanded your conformity. But what kept you safe is now suffocating you. The persona was never the self. It was only the costume the self wore to be accepted. As the ego begins to unravel, you may find yourself in unfamiliar territory. Your voice falters when you try to fake enthusiasm. Your body aches when you betray your instincts. Your nervous system reacts with tremors and fatigue when you smile to keep the peace. These are not malfunctions, they are signals. The psyche is no longer willing to participate in the old script. The performance has ended. Now begins the unveiling. Jung understood that the ego, though necessary, is not meant to rule the psyche. It is a servant, not the master, and when it clings to control, it resists the soul's quiet rebellion. The ego will cry out that you are unraveling, failing, breaking apart. But what you are truly doing is breaking open. This dissolution is sacred. It is the tearing down of false structures so that something more authentic can take root. You begin to question the image you spent years perfecting. Do I really need to be admired to be worthy? Do I need applause to feel alive? These are not midlife crises. They are soul awakenings. You start to speak more honestly, not because it is easy, but because the lie is too heavy to carry. You begin to say no, not out of rebellion, but out of reverence for your energy. You withdraw from roles that once defined you, the achiever, the caretaker, the peacemaker, and in doing so, you rediscover your essence. The grief that arises is real, but so is the relief. The death of the ego feels like exposure, like being naked in a world that prefers armor. But Jung taught that emotional vulnerability is not regression, it is initiation. To feel deeply is to return to life. To stop seeking validation is to reclaim authority. You no longer shapeshift for approval. Instead, you consult the compass of your inner truth, and though you may not yet have a name for who you are becoming, you know with quiet certainty that the old is gone, and the new is not an invention, but a revelation. This liminal space, the unraveling of the ego and the rising of the self, is not a crisis. It is consecrated ground. And if you can hold yourself through the unraveling without rushing to rebuild, you will find yourself not in pieces, but in presence. Whole, awake, real. When the soul begins to rise, the world itself begins to whisper. Suddenly, what once seemed random takes on a quiet significance. A number repeats itself again and again, appearing on clocks, receipts, street signs. A book leaps into your hands as though it had been waiting for you. You hear a phrase on a podcast that answers a question you had not yet spoken aloud. These are not coincidences in the causal sense. Carl Jung called them synchronicities, meaningful coincidences that are not caused but connected. They do not follow logic, but they follow meaning. These moments are not anomalies. They are reflections of a sacred order, an invisible intelligence weaving your inner journey into the fabric of outer experience. Jung understood that the psyche and the world are not separate realms. They are two expressions of the same unfolding mystery. He called this unity the unus mundus, the one world where psyche and matter meet. Synchronicity is the bridge. It is the thread that binds your unconscious shifts to outer events, and when these moments begin to multiply, it is often a sign that you are entering sacred terrain. Your soul is stirring, and the world, like a mirror, is reflecting that awakening. These experiences often arise during times of inner upheaval, when the ego loosens its grip, when the old life begins to dissolve. In such liminal states, the unconscious rises, and with it, symbols. Owls that appear when you seek wisdom, butterflies when you are shedding skin, a familiar song when you are silently grieving. These are not signs to be followed blindly. Jung cautioned against projection. Synchronicities are not commands, they are invitations. They are not directives, but confirmations. They do not tell you what to do, but remind you that you are not walking alone. This deepening of perception is not fantasy. It is the natural consequence of consciousness expanding. As you awaken, the world becomes symbolic. A broken glass may echo a breaking identity. A storm may reflect the chaos inside your heart. The unconscious speaks in images, and the more you listen, the more life begins to speak back. Synchronicity is the soul's quiet language. It asks not for belief, but for attention. When you see a pattern repeating, when a dream overlaps with reality, when a thought is mirrored by the world outside, pause, feel, ask, what is my soul showing me now? Because your rising is not just an inner event. It echoes outward, touching the fabric of existence itself. In those moments, you are no longer a bystander. You are participating in the sacred dance between the seen and the unseen. And if you pay attention, you will hear the universe whisper back, "You are on the path. Keep going." When the soul begins to rise, it carries within it a hunger that no longer tolerates the shallow, the artificial, or the empty repetition of habit. What once entertained you now leaves you hollow. The scrolling, the noise, the praise, the performance, they no longer satisfy. There is a stirring, an ache, a whisper in the silence that says, "This is not enough." Carl Jung would not call this boredom. He would name it what it truly is, the awakening of the deep psyche, the call of the self emerging through the cracks of the persona. It is not depression or disinterest, it is the soul remembering its own depth. Jung believed that human beings are not merely biological organisms, striving for survival or pleasure. We are mythological creatures, wired for meaning, for symbols, for truth. The moment this yearning awakens in you, a kind of inner divorce begins. You part ways with the false gods of performance, popularity, and approval. They may still circle around you, offering fleeting moments of validation, but they cannot fill the inner cup anymore. You reach your goals and still feel empty. You receive recognition and feel nothing. The life you built starts to feel like someone else's reflection. This is not failure. It is the beginning of alignment. Jung called this rupture the collapse of the outer program. What society told you would make you whole no longer holds, and what rises in its place is not clarity, but questioning. Why am I here? What am I not facing? What truth have I silenced in order to belong? These questions are not a detour, they are the path. The soul does not awaken with answers, it awakens with longing. This longing is not satisfied by consumption, it demands communion. You no longer crave distraction, you crave depth. Your attention turns to ancient texts, timeless wisdom, archetypal stories. You read not to escape, but to remember. You listen not for entertainment, but for echoes of truth. You find yourself walking in nature, lighting candles, staring at the stars, journaling late into the night. These are not meaningless acts. Jung would say they are ritual gestures through which the unconscious speaks. In these small sacred acts, the soul finds nourishment. As you awaken, your conversations change. You can no longer tolerate empty words. Small talk feels suffocating. You yearn for truth, for vulnerability, for real connection. Jung taught that true dialogue begins when the persona fades and the psyche speaks. And when that happens, your relationships transform. Some will fall away, others will deepen, but all will be filtered through the new voice rising within you. This hunger for meaning is not a phase, it is a return. The return to the self, to your original essence, before the world taught you who to be. It is not about quitting your job or leaving society. It is about reorienting your life around what matters. Jung believed the self does not seek status, it seeks wholeness. And when your accomplishments no longer feel like home, it is not because you are lost, it is because you are being called into something real. Once you have tasted this depth, you will not settle for the surface again. You will walk differently. You will choose differently. Because now, you are not just living, you are listening. And what you are listening to is your own soul rising. When your soul begins to rise, it rarely announces itself with clarity. Instead, it whispers through dreams. Not idle fantasies, but luminous fragments of truth emerging from the deep. You begin to dream with an intensity you cannot explain. Some dreams disturb you. Others stir something beautiful and ancient in your chest. You awaken with symbols etched into your awareness. A face, a number, a phrase that lingers like smoke. You cannot shake the feeling that it means something, and it does. This is not random. It is the unconscious speaking in its native tongue, image, emotion, and symbol. Carl Jung called dreams the royal road to the unconscious. He saw them not as distractions, but as sacred letters from the soul, sealed in mystery and delivered each night while the ego rests. When your outer life unravels, your dream life takes form. This is not chaos, it is reordering. The psyche, no longer confined to the persona or social mask, begins its descent inward and returns bearing truths your waking mind cannot yet articulate. And this guidance often arrives in the language of archetypes. The wise old man, the wounded child, the shadowy figure chasing you through a forest. These are not mere characters, they are the living forces of your inner mythology. Each one carries the emotional truth your ego refuses to face. Recurring dreams are especially potent. The same house, the same chase, the same symbolic death. Jung believed this is not repetition, but insistence. The unconscious does not whisper once. It returns again and again until the conscious mind can receive it. Not to torment you, but to guide you. Nightmares, though jarring, are not punishments. They are confrontations with what you have buried. The chase means you are fleeing from the truth. The fall signifies surrender. Death is symbolic of ego collapse. To engage these dreams is to step into the alchemical chamber of transformation. Jung urged his patients to write them down, speak to them, and above all, listen. Because the dream is not there to confuse you, it is there to wake you. And when you begin to see your dreams not as illusions, but as sacred rituals, something extraordinary happens. You start living in two worlds, the outer world of form and the inner world of meaning. The line between them blurs. What was once just a dream now becomes a compass. You realize your soul has been speaking to you all along. You were simply learning how to understand its language. There comes a moment on the soul's journey when fear no longer signals danger, but transformation. You stand at the edge of your known world. Behind you lies comfort, safety, identity, belonging. Ahead is the unknown, vast and unpromised. Your ego trembles, clinging to what was. Yet a quieter voice from within urges, keep going. This is not recklessness. This is sacred courage. Carl Jung taught that no true individuation occurs without loss, and no inner awakening comes without sacrifice. You are not being punished. You are being called to shed the skin of the person you once had to be. Letting go is not easy. The ego grieves each unraveling. It mourns the roles, the stories, the familiar patterns that once gave it shape. But your soul is not interested in performance. It seeks truth, and truth has a price. You cannot become who you truly are while clinging to the scaffolding of who you were told to be. Jobs fall away. Relationships change form. Your interests shift. Even your name in your own mouth can sound foreign. This dissonance is not dysfunction, it is metamorphosis. Jung understood that this collapse of the outer structure is the soul reclaiming authority from the ego. You may lose people, not because they betrayed you, but because they no longer mirror your frequency. You may lose dreams, not because you failed, but because they belonged to someone you no longer are. The false self dies slowly. But it must go, because the self, the deep, enduring center of your being, cannot rise while the mask still stands. Jung believed that fear, when felt at the threshold of change, is not a stop sign, but an invitation. The ego fears the unknown. The soul recognizes it as home. So if you are weeping for the person you used to be, let the tears come. That version of you did their job. They protected you, they sought belonging. But now, your soul demands something more. Authenticity. You are not breaking down, you are breaking open. You are not unraveling, you are unfolding. This ache is not the end of something. It is the labor of rebirth. To walk away from the familiar, to let go of the script you were handed, and to follow the subtle, often silent call of the self. That is what Jung called individuation. And that is the highest act of love you can offer your own becoming. There arrives a sacred moment on the path of awakening when you no longer feel like a fragmented self navigating a chaotic world. Instead, you begin to sense the quiet stirrings of something greater moving within you. It is subtle, yet unmistakable, like the hush before a sunrise. You are not being watched by others, but witnessed by something deeper, a presence that neither judges nor applauds, but simply sees. Carl Jung called this presence the self, the organizing center of the psyche that holds the union of all your parts. It is not the ego that needs roles, masks, or applause. It is the essence behind all identities, the eternal flame that has been quietly waiting beneath your story. As the self begins to rise, you no longer chase validation through the roles you once wore like armor. You may have lived as the achiever, the pleaser, the rebel, the caregiver. These identities served a purpose. They were the scaffolding of survival. But now they feel like garments stitched from someone else's design. The self does not need a reason to exist. It does not explain. It simply radiates. And when you begin to live from that center, your choices change. You no longer ask, will they accept me? You ask, does this resonate with my truth? Jung taught that when we shift from ego to self, life becomes less about performance and more about presence. You start to walk away from things that are out of alignment, not in anger, but in clarity. You say no without guilt. You say yes without strategy. You stop performing strength and start embodying integrity. You let yourself be seen without needing to be understood. This is not arrogance. It is the humility of wholeness. In this space, paradox becomes natural. You feel grief and gratitude at once. You are aware of your smallness in the universe and yet feel intimately part of something vast. The self holds both the light and the shadow, not as opposites to be resolved, but as energies to be reconciled. Jung believed that this capacity to carry contradiction is a mark of psychic maturity. You no longer seek perfection, you seek integration. When the self leads, the ego becomes a companion, not a dictator. You stop resisting uncertainty. You begin to trust the rhythm of your life. Even your delays feel sacred. Even your pain begins to feel purposeful. Jung called this the symbolic life, an inner stance where the world is no longer random, but radiant with meaning. And perhaps the most mysterious sign of all, you begin to feel the sacred not outside of you, but within. You no longer search for divinity in temples, texts, or teachings. You feel it breathing in your chest. You tear up at beauty without knowing why. You feel the presence of something holy in your quiet moments, your suffering, your stillness. Jung called this the numinous, a brush with the eternal that cannot be taught, only lived. To walk with the self is not to become more. It is to remember who you have always been beneath the noise. And once you feel that, once you touch that stillness, you no longer need to force life. You begin to allow it. And in that surrender, you rise. If you find reflections of your own path in these signs, take heart. You are not unraveling into chaos, you are unfolding into essence. What feels like confusion is often initiation. What seems like loss may be the shedding of everything that no longer speaks your soul's name. Carl Jung once wrote, The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And this is not a metaphor. It is a summons, a call to descend into the depths of your psyche, to face your shadow with tenderness, to walk through fire with open eyes, and to return not with answers, but with a deeper presence. The journey of soul awakening is not a linear ascent, it spirals inward. It unearths what has been buried and reclaims what has been forgotten. It demands that you outgrow the comforts that once defined you and surrender the illusions that kept you safe. And though this shedding may feel like death, it is in fact the sacred dismantling that precedes rebirth. You are not walking away from yourself, you are walking toward your truest form, the one who existed long before the masks were worn. This path is not for the faint of heart. It will ask you to question everything. It will strip you of roles, attachments, and beliefs that once gave you identity. But in their absence, something extraordinary begins to emerge, a deeper knowing, a quiet strength, an inner anchor that no storm can shake. This is the self-awakening, and when it begins to guide your life, you no longer live from fear or performance, but from alignment and truth. So if the road feels dark, keep walking. If the silence feels heavy, listen deeper. If the losses feel unbearable, trust that something sacred is being born through the emptiness. The soul does not rise with applause. It rises in stillness, in surrender, in fierce honesty. And as it rises, your life begins to mirror the wholeness you've reclaimed within. You are not behind, you are not broken. You are precisely where the self needs you to be. Do not measure your growth by the approval of others. Measure it by the depth of your peace, the gentleness of your presence, the courage it takes to live without masks. Because this is the true alchemy, not to become someone new, but to remember who you were before the world told you who to be. And that remembering, that sacred return, is the quiet miracle of a soul that is finally rising. If this message stirred something inside you, don't stop here. The next video will take you even deeper into the journey of healing, growth, and self-discovery. It might just be the breakthrough your soul has been waiting for. Tap into it now. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and join a community committed to truth, transformation, and real inner change. You're not alone on this path. I'll meet you in the next video, where we continue becoming who we were always meant to be.